Welcome to class. Today we are going to talk about significance of culture in language learning and teaching. We have been discussing about how language is socio-culturally rooted, role of culture, importance of culture in language learning and teaching. That's what we are going to talk today. If you recall, uh, language and culture, we already discussed language and culture are intertwined. And the influence goes in bi-directional mode. So language influences culture, and culture also influences language. So the influence goes in both the directions. We discover distinct set of people with distinct set of cultural patterns and beliefs and practices. We all have acquired our mother tongue in a particular socio-cultural space. And we all construct knowledge about the environment, about the immediate society, about the culture we grow in through the input from the immediate environment. So whatever belief system, value system, the customs, practices, patterns, lifestyle, right? They all are implicitly embedded. They are embedded into the structures that we construct in language. The terms, uh, the, the utterances, the phrases, the words that we learn them in a context. See, when we learn a word, we not only learn spelling of the word or sound of the word, meaning of the word, but also the context in which these words are used. So when as a child we acquire our native language, we are learning this in a three-dimensional way. So learning word becomes learning of the sound system, learning of the meaning that word represents, or the meaning that is encoded in the word, and the context in which these words are used. And when we say context, then of course we are referring to the socio-cultural context, not only linguistic context, but also social and cultural context in which these words and expressions are used. So they cannot be separated. Language and culture cannot be separated. They are deeply rooted and interdependent. So our values, our fundamental assumptions, social behavior, attitudes, and the communicative patterns, socialization patterns, networking, these are the things that constitute a particular society or a particular group. And we cannot keep culture and society apart from language. If you recall, we also talked about Grover, Alfred L. Grover, in our initial lectures. And a very powerful statement Grover makes. And the statement is, I quote from him, culture started when speech was available. And from that beginning, the enrichment of either one led the other to develop further. You can imagine, the time when we started settling in social groups. If you go to the prehistoric periods, and how human beings would have settled in social groups, that all must have started with interaction. So that is what Grover is referring to. So he says that culture is the consequence of interaction, and the act of communication is their cultural manifestation and assertion. If you look at Tyler, E.B. Tyler, he says culture in a complex definition includes beliefs, arts, skill, moralities, laws, tradition, and behaviors that an individual as a member of society gets from his own society. So culture is an umbrella term. It encompasses everything and all activities that we do. And in a particular socio-cultural context, our activities, our associations, our relationships, our socialization patterns, they all have a common pattern. And this commonality binds us together. If you recall, we talked about Martha Vineyard Island story while we were doing William Lebov's work. We're talking about William Lebov's work, his work in Martha Vineyard Island. We talked about it. And how some of the inhabitants of a particular age group who considered themselves as the custodian of the cultural values and social fabric, pattern, and network, they wanted to preserve and sound distinct from the summer visitors whom they never liked on the island. And in order to make a distinction, they deliberately and consciously used diphthongs to sound different. That was the urge for an identity. That was the urge, right? To be sounding different. And this is exactly what they did. And you can recall about other variation studies that we talked about. Everywhere you find that element, present very much there in all the utterances and sentences and expressions and discourse that have been referred to, and the social structure, how the social structure was embedded in their linguistic structures, and how the linguistic structure mimicked or represented their social structure, their social stratification, if you recall those discussions. So language and culture are inseparable and intertwined. So why we are discussing it today? We are discussing it today to be sensitive towards these things, these nuances, cultural nuances, social nuances embedded in the linguistic structures. Because when you learn a language, a new language, when you learn a second language, you are not learning language in terms of words, sounds, sentences, vocabulary, and other grammatical features. But we learn a language to make sense and create meaning, derive meaning out of these structures. And these structures are socio-culturally rooted. So language opens a new window to look into a new culture. A new language exposes you, or opens up an entirely new world for you. And that is why, while learning and teaching, the role of culture, importance of culture becomes very significant. And to quote a few scholars, as you can see on the slides, I quote from Sapir, and it says, every cultural pattern and every single act of social behavior involves communication in either an explicit or implicit sense. So basically, socialization and interaction cannot happen without the socio-cultural context. So meaning is there, right? If you look at David Crystal, 1971, what does he say? He says, language is a systematic, conventional use of sound, signs, or written symbols in a human society for communication and self-expression. We already have talked about Saussure's idea of signifier, signified, Saussure's idea of la langue, la parole. We have already talked about communicative competence and idea of communicating competence by Delheims. We have already talked about M.A.K. Halliday's systemic grammar and how learning a language is all about making meaning. So I won't repeat them here. You can go back to those videos of the first week, and you can learn a second week, third week. So early part of the course, and you can find details of all of these, like systemic functions of language, like a speaking model, like communicative competence, like speedboat hypothesis. We have already done all these things. So I will cut short and come directly to the topic. Saussure says if words stood for pre-existing concepts, Saussure says if words stood for pre-existing concepts, they would all have exact equivalence in meaning from one language to the next. But this is not true. The concept of a sound, image, or symbol is different in different languages. So he's saying that these concepts are not independent. They are socio-culturally rooted. And that is why if words stood for pre-existing concepts, they would have the exact equivalent in all other languages, which is not the case. We know that translation becomes so difficult when we look at the texts, and when we are translating one text from one language to the other language in target language, we find that there is a pattern incongruity, and equivalent expressions are not available. And in that case, because equivalent concepts are not available, it gets very difficult to translate idioms, phrases, a metaphorical use of language, unless and until we are familiar with the particular culture and society in which these languages are used. So, as a learner, we need to understand the social structure, the cultural pattern, the belief system, the value system, in order to make sense in the target language or the language you have targeted to learn. And that's why teaching and learning of cultural patterns, social beliefs, cultural beliefs, value systems, lifestyle, social behavior becomes so important. So, the role of culture in language learning. When we say language learning is not a sum total of learning of sounds of the language, learning of words in the language, sentences, structures, and grammatical principles. Language encodes cultural norms, social systems, structures, and it plays a very significant role in cognitive development of the learners. So, understanding socio-cultural context along with grammatical principles is very significant in effective language learning and teaching. And we have a lot of research and interest generated in the area where scholars have talked at length about significance of teaching and learning of culture and cultural norms and values in second language or foreign language teaching learning scenario. So different languages have different sets of phrases, idioms, cultural specific concepts. For example, if you take a Hindi example phrase, Lakshman Rekha, now it's very difficult to construct and translate Lakshman Rekha in English. We do not find such equivalent because Lakshman Rekha is not simply a structure or a phrase. It is rooted into the whole understanding of the mythological story, whole understanding of social belief, and the meaning, loaded meaning. It's a loaded term, Lakshman Rekha. Word like Maryada, right? Now, Hindi word like Maryada. Can we call it limits? It's not limit. Simply, it's not limit. Because it's very difficult to find an equivalent in English. Because the word Maryada, the phrases like Lakshman Rekha, right? They are loaded. They have cultural connotations. They have certain social belief associated with them, and certain practices associated with them. So the way native speakers of Hindi interpret these words and expressions, it is very difficult to translate in English, and vice versa. The British society and social patterns, concepts, practices, norms, difficult to be translated in any of the other languages, because the languages are socio-culturally rooted. They are connected deeply. And we realize the difficulty while we try to translate them. And this difficulty is nothing but our act of deassociating or delinking language from the culture. So in order to translate and make sense, it's important to understand the context in which these phrases, these words are used. And that is why you can make sense, you can make meaning only when you understand the culture where the language is rooted. And when we learn a particular language, when we teach a foreign language or learn a foreign language, it's important that culture becomes the fifth skill. So we have four integrated skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. These are linguistic skills, language skills. But now people are, arguing for culture as the fifth skill. So now we say five skills, integrated skills, because culture remains an integrated part of whole teaching learning process of second language or foreign language. So when we say learning a foreign language or learning a second, third language, it is all about learning a new culture, lifestyle, attitude, way of thinking, a new and different logical understanding. It's all about understanding individual as well as social behavior and a set of new value system. Indeed, teaching a foreign language does not only require providing students or learners with syntactic structures, new vocabulary and expressions, but also to incorporate major cultural elements and pragmatic understanding, which are intertwined with the language itself. Culture is considered to be the fifth language skill, as I pointed out. So, when we say language learning, we focus on four integrated skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Four language skills. Language becomes the fifth one. Uh, I am sorry, culture becomes the fifth one. So now we talk in terms of five skills: listening, speaking, reading, writing, and understanding culture. So when we are learning and teaching a foreign language, right? We are talking in terms of the five skills, out of which the fifth skill, culture, remains as a foundation of acquiring these four skills. It remains in the background, but not passively there, very proactively there, and it constitutes the background of learning these four skills. That's the role of culture in learning a language and teaching of a foreign language. So when you look at culture and language, culture is the foundation, considered as the foundation of communication. And if you recall the speaking model, you remember? The whole idea is that who talks to whom, what, when, why, and how. The whole process is governed by the cultural understanding. So, what to talk, when to talk, whom to talk, how to talk, why to talk, right? These are all governed by cultural understanding. So, culture is considered as the foundation of communication. They are interdependent, and they are inseparable. So culture governs the entire phenomenon of communication in terms of who talks to whom, about what, and how it continues, how the process continues, right? And this is how it makes us understand the meaning, make sense of it. Now, why we need to understand to teach and learn culture of that particular language we are learning as second language or foreign language? So there are many arguments for that, but we can summarize these arguments in terms of 7 goals that Tomlin and Stampelski 1993 point out. And what are these goals? Number 1, we require to teach culture, we require to make the learner acquainted with the socio-cultural context of the language in order to help students to develop an understanding of the fact that all people exhibit culturally conditioned behaviors. So when we say behavior, social behavior, they are socio-culturally conditioned. They are socio-culturally oriented. So in order to acquaint the learners, we need to help the students to develop an understanding of that. The number 2, to help students to develop an understanding that social variables such as age, sex, social class, and place of residence influence the way in which people speak and behave. And I do not have to explain this point because the entire discussion on variation studies initiated by William Lebov with a new methodology followed by many of the other sociolinguists, they all established the fact that social structures are represented and encoded in the linguistic structures. So all these social indices like sex, gender, age, class, right? Reason, race, everything will have a bearing on the linguistic structures in some way or the other. And these are all established facts. And we have discussed them in terms of Martha Vineyard Island case, in terms of English in New York City case by William Lebov, right? Treadwell's work, Eckhart's work. We have already discussed all of these. Topland's work. So we have done separate videos on language variation and social stratification of language. You can go to those videos and refresh the understanding again. Third goal is to help students to become more aware of conventional behavior in common situation in the target culture. We all speak English, right? But Indian English appears different from British English, not only in terms of linguistic structures, but also in terms of socio-cultural context, right? So it's not only linguistic structures and the sounds, the words, the semantic extensions, the structure of sentences. For example, Indian language, Indian English has lots of duplications. It also bears culturally sensitive and socially oriented expressions, belief systems, and patterns that we find in abundance in Indian English. So English, one language with multiple cultures. And that is why English at different places becomes Englishes because it is rooted in that particular socio-cultural context. So even if we take the example of English, otherwise All languages are rooted in their socio-cultural context. So, in order to help students, learners understand these nuances of language and its relationship with culture, it's important that they're acquainted with, they're exposed to the cultural belief systems, the cultural patterns, social beliefs, value systems, lifestyle, social behavior of the speakers, and it becomes pertinent and significant for them to learn in order to make sense when they use expressions. Number four, to help students to increase their awareness of the cultural connotations of words and phrases in the target language. Right? As I told you, that the idioms, phrases, frozen expressions, right, proverbs, they're all culturally rooted. So if you want to understand the meaning of them, you need to understand the social and cultural context in which they are used. And that is why it becomes very important for all of us while teaching or learning foreign language or second language, third language, to understand these nuances. Number five, to help students develop the ability to evaluate and refine generalizations about the target culture in terms of supporting evidence. Right? So when you are familiar with cultural patterns, you'll be easy. It will be easy for you to mix with the speakers of the language, right? It will be easy for you to relate to that community, society where the language is located. Number six, to help students to develop the necessary skills to locate and organize information about the target culture. Obvious. And number seven, last but not least, to stimulate learners into students' intellectual curiosity about the target culture and to encourage empathy towards its people. So knowing about the culture through language help you understand the people, its speakers, their social behavior, their cultural beliefs, norms, practices, lifestyle, uh, you know, everything that you can imagine. So culture opens a window, right? Uh, and learning a new language opens a window to learn a new culture. So when you are introduced to a new language, you are also introduced to a new culture, a new society. And you can explore it plausibly only when you are familiar not only with linguistic structures and patterns, but also social structure and cultural patterns. And that is why learning and teaching of culture in second language or foreign language classroom becomes so important. And culture is considered the fifth skill, four skills being uh, you know, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The fifth one is culture. And that is the significance of culture in teaching and learning of language in a foreign language teaching classroom, learning classroom, or a second language, third language learning teaching classroom. So this is it. This is how we establish the interdependence and a very deeper connection of language and culture. And also we highlight the importance of understanding culture while learning a new language, while learning a foreign language. So this is it for now. And you can go to the earlier lectures in the course where we have talked about how linguistic structures represent and encode the cultural values and the cultural patterns. So how social structures are represented in language structures, and the entire enterprise of variation studies, the variation tradition. Variationist tradition is all about establishing this fact that social structures are represented encoded, and embedded in the linguistic structures. So this is it for now. Thank you very much.